Well, thank you so much today for joining us. Welcome to the Educators Cooperative Panel on Anti-Racist Teaching, Learning, and Leading from the Classroom. We are so grateful to each of you for joining us today. If you would, could you offer a quick introduction, who you are and what you do, and then we'll jump into our discussion. Dr. Gibbs, why don't we start with you?
All right, I'll jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Ricki Gibbs. I have the honor and privilege of serving as principal at Warner Arts Magnet Elementary. We're a pre-K through 4 elementary school located in Metro Nashville Public Schools in Nashville, Tennessee.
Hello, Lois, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Elois Freeman. I am a native Nashvilleian. I do a teaching and learning and ministry work in North Nashville, mostly through Westwood Baptist Church in partnership with Pearl Cone and other agencies. My own background is elementary school teaching. I was in the classroom for about 30 years and have spent another 20 or so in terms of advocating for parental rights and justice. As a matter of fact, at Westwood, I do use the title of Minister of Justice. Pleased to meet everyone.
So happy you're here.
You have to call on me. I know I'm next. There's nobody else here. I'm Jim Loewen. Most of you know me by reputation, and hopefully you've read my book, at least one of them. I wrote Lies My Teacher Told Me, which turns out to be the best-selling book by a living sociologist. The sociologists have done better, but they're dead. Second of all, I wrote a book specifically for you folks, that is teaching what really happened, which is aimed at people who teach K-12 and especially teach stuff about society, who teach social studies or history, American history, world history, civics, and so on. So I hope you're familiar with those two books, and maybe even also with a couple of my other works, Sundown Towns, of which there are a lot of sundown towns in Tennessee, and Lives Across America. And Tennessee wins the prize for the most terrible historical markers in any single state in favor of a single guy. And I'll just leave that in suspense for you. You can read the book and see what prize Tennessee gets for that occurrence. And a couple other words about me. I started out my teaching career at Tougaloo College, which is at HBCU in Mississippi, and I finished it at the University of Vermont, which is at HWCU. I assert that I have taught at the blackest and the whitest schools in America. I now live in DC, and I'm just delighted to be here. I wish I could have been there in person because I owe it to myself to spend a week in Nashville, and I was counting on doing that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves and for joining the conversation today. Earlier on, when folks were registering, we asked them to submit questions or topics that they were grappling with or questions that they wanted to shed some light onto. And I shared those with you all. Is there anything there that stands out to you or anywhere you'd like to begin our conversation?
Well, I do have something I wanted to say about that. Two things, actually. The first one is that I think that the best way to get people to be anti-racist is to get them to do something. Okay?
Yeah.
Actually do something. This working on how to eradicate every last little bit of white racism. There's even white racism in Black folks' minds, if you know what I'm saying there. And this working to get rid of every little last bit of it, because we got to fix ourselves first or something like that. We will never do a thing. Whereas if we do something, actually do something, and it can be quite a mild, interesting thing that isn't primarily an anti-racist thing, but it is anti-racist in its meaning, why then maybe we'll do something else later. And besides that, you run into some trouble and you learn some stuff from the doing and from the issues that come up. So what I want to say first is do something. And the second thing I want to say is to the teachers listening, be sure that you run your ideas, especially if you're going to teach American history the way I think you should teach it. Be sure you run that idea, and I tell you how in teaching what really happened. Be sure you run it past your principal or past your assistant principal or whoever it is, social studies curriculum director, whatever it is. They won't want to hear very much from you because they're busy. But if you just tell them, I'm not going to just teach the textbook this year, I'm going to be doing something, I'm going to be doing some of these things, and it'll be better, then they'll have your back.
So Jim, I'm a build off of what you just hit on, Jim. One of the things you kind of hit on was one of the participants asked the question, how do we move from conversation to action? And you hit it right, you hit the nail on the head when you said start with self. So that's one of the things that I've consistently been preaching as we talk about this anti-racist stance, this anti-racist movement in education. We've been having a lot of conversations since we went through, I call 2020 the year of awakening. It was a year that, a lot of people talk about the pandemic and things of that nature, but having the chance to just sit at home in the middle of the pandemic while we went from being in our daily lives of ripping and running and always going on to the next, and having time to just slow down since everyone was home, it gave us the time to reflect. And that's why I call it the year of the awakening, because a lot of conversations that we've been having over the years, and we've been having these anti-racist conversations for decades now. But it was always, well, what about this? Or what if? It was always a what if. And now everyone is having the conversation and saying, what can I do? So when we talk about start with self, Michael Jackson told us years ago, you got to start with the man in the mirror. So when we talk about start with self, it's about understanding your own bias. When we make this movement towards anti-racist in education, and when we talk about understanding your own bias, it's not bad to have bias because we all have them, but being uneducated or unaware of those biases and then projecting your values on others is when we end up rolling into having racism in education. So as we talk about how we start with self, not only just checking your bias, when you talk about what can I do to move this from just a conversation to action. So we'll check that bias and then be mindful that we're not imposing our values onto others. And that's one of the things in education that we often, as educators, because we have the power of the pen, we have the power of voicing the curriculum, that we tend to take our values and our beliefs on how we think things should be, and we begin to impose them onto others. So by just having that reflection of checking yourself, and then as Jim was pointing out, when you said run it by others, I don't necessarily say, make sure you run it by your principal or assistant principal. And granted, as educators, that's a good thing to do. You don't want to just go rogue, but also it's about building that community, having that community of trusted individuals who will always shoot straight with you, who will always be your accountability partner as you make this movement. Because as we make these steps to become more anti-racist in education, it's scary. Like it's scary to be that person that steps out, especially if you're in a school or you're in a community where everyone isn't speaking this same language. It can be a scary point. So by creating that small community of people who you can entrust, you can have those conversations with, who you can throw ideas and hold each other accountable, will be the great first step in moving from conversation to action.
And I'd like to chime in. I felt that when Jim began to speak, that he was literally speaking what I was thinking. And then as Ricki came on, I can just say amen. My thinking was that it is time for action, and each of them have articulated what that could look like. I think of it particularly in that if we are in a culture that separates us so much, we either not only just racially and in community, but even in our roles. And as a result of that, we don't know one another. And so therefore, part of this whole reason of racism is that certain people have been taught and conditioned that they are at the top of a hierarchy or they're better. And then other people are down low. And whether you want to accept it or not, it's easy to buy into that because we just live separate lives. So when it comes to this point of doing something, one of the things to do is just mindset change in terms of all the things that you're reading and learning, challenging yourself, as Ricki said, you take this personally. I can do something about this. But then the action part is get to know somebody different. One of the things that often is said is that when you look around your own circle of peers and friends, does everybody look the same? And so that was one of the things that could be done. But the other side is, do you know there are so many people around us who need help, who need us? There are so many entities and groups in our communities who are reaching out to help, who could use support. And so that would be my part. And that I was thinking that even as I read the questions and whatnot, I mean, the questions are about being anti-racist and, this is, can we do this and can we do that? But there are just some practical human pieces that we can engage in that don't require, am I going to do this right? Am I not going to do it right? Or is this following what Dr. Kendi said? Or is this following what Dr. Loewen said? Or is this, that's the whole point. Let's check in on our humanity, and let's look at some others who are needing us and finding a place to go help.
So I want to throw this thought process out because I'm definitely going to share how I feel on this topic, but just to bounce some ideas off of you two as we dig into one of the participants asked, and it's a question that I've been posed with a couple of times over the last couple of months. Education has become such a political landmine. Like it's how do we navigate the politics of education? And then as we talk about anti-racism in education, what's advice that we can give teachers about how to navigate the political mindset of this work when you have folks out there who are saying, we need to keep that out of the classroom, that like students are not ready for this type of conversation.
Let me make a couple of specific suggestions. These are particularly aimed at the beginning of the school year. And I have to say they are aimed at people who teach social studies, civics, US history, any history. I've got a couple of ideas, just a couple, on how to deal with this in a math class, let's say, but I'm speaking right now to history, social studies, that stuff. And the first one is, whenever we start talking about those subjects, history, social studies, we start thinking about the Native Americans because they were here first, okay, chronologically. Well, it turns out that almost all textbooks do a pretty cursory job dealing with Native American cultures and the people who were here first. Okay, they do a poor job in several ways. One way they do it is every single textbook but one and I'm the only living person who ever survived reading 18 U.S. history textbooks.
Yeah.
They were so boring. Every single one of them but one, and you're not using that one. That one was published in 1975. It's the only one that's up to date, ironically. But every single one of them tells us that the native people walked across the Bering Strait during the Ice Age when the water was lower. Now, it turns out we don't know that. It even also turns out that's fairly unlikely, according to the best knowledge we have in archaeology. And I talk about this in Teaching What Really Happened. Almost surely they came by boat. It's a lot easier. So why don't we give them boats in our history textbooks? Because, and I'm going to say this bluntly, because basically we make them stupid. That is, they're not as smart as we are. Have they invented the internet? I don't think so. So they trudged across by boat across the land. And so the very first thing to do that you could do, if you wish, is to get students involved in doing some research on this with the web and so on. And this gets them then involved in critiquing the textbook, because the textbook doesn't know what it's talking about, and they'll quickly find that out. They will find out that there's some issues, and that the textbook cannot say, even if it did know what it's talking about, cannot say this is what happened, because we don't know what happened for sure. And it's wonderful that we don't know what happened for sure on topic number one, because that gets people thinking, and they'll maybe keep on thinking when we get to topic number two. All right, and the other thing I'm going to say is, when we get to the explorers, they are basically presented as heroes. All right, basically it's kind of a litany of them. I'm putting my hand over my heart, because you're kind of supposed to. You're supposed to salute some darn flag, the explorer's flag, when you talk about the explorers. And there's a litany of them. You know, there was Columbus, and there was Magellan, and there was that guy who sailed around Africa, Da Gama, that was Da Gama. And there was the guy who discovered the Mississippi River. A little bit of a problem, because there were people already going down it. But anyway, that was De Soto, right? All these. And if you ask 50-year-olds in Nashville, they will remember. They'll even remember Da Gama, but they won't be quite sure exactly what he did. Okay. Well, I've got a really good resource for you. It is in my own work. I'm sorry about it. If you get a hold of what's called the poster book, Lies My Teacher Told Me About Christopher Columbus, doesn't cost very much, from the New Press, and you put up the poster on about October 1st, because that's before Columbus Day, right? And right, a math teacher could put it up. I mean, it can go up in any classroom, I suppose. But anyway, it pairs stuff from textbooks with quotes from original sources that shows the textbooks to be exactly 180 degrees long on detail after detail after detail after major point after major point after major point.
Yeah.
And one of them is about Da Gama. And I want you to read what I say in that book about Da Gama, and then get students to read it, and then get them thinking, should he be presented with your hand over your heart? This man was an utter terrorist, and so was in a way Columbus, and so was in a way almost each of the explorers. The question is, what did they do on the second visit? So the students themselves will start questioning what the textbooks say about the explorers. And then I have some more ways about getting them to question the next thing that they say. And when they're questioning their textbooks, and white students will question their textbooks just as much as black students, because they can see what's wrong. And then I suggest you do something, and the something I suggest you do is write the editor at the publisher, and also write the authors. And you will find out probably that you don't even get a reply from the authors, because they didn't write the books. They're just renting their names, and they don't do anything right. They don't even know what's in the books. They haven't even read the books. I'll shut up now. But that's an example of doing something, and I don't see how that's going to alienate anybody. I think they're going to say, "Wow, something's wrong here with these textbooks," and we want them to say that.
So before I jump in, thinking through that process, when teachers are presented with the thought process from either parents or co-workers, hey, this whole anti-racist teaching, it's too political. It doesn't need to be in the classroom. Like I say, I heard that thought process, and it stuck deep with me. So before I jump in, do you have any thoughts that you would like to share?
I do. I would, first of all, if I were a teacher, I would never let anyone know whether I was a Democrat or a Republican, no matter how directly I was asked. I know I have reasons for saying that. Right? And second of all, I would never be mad at anybody who is a Republican. I would say to them, you know what? I want to help you become an anti-racist Republican. And I think the Republicans need anti-racists even more than the Democrats, don't you? And see what he or she says to that. You know, just see what they say to that.
Yeah.
I tell people, and this is true, that I used to be a Republican. Anybody my age might have been a Republican. I mean, for example, Martin Luther King Sr. was a Republican. I trust you know that. Jackie Robinson was a Republican, and for good reason. I mean, it was, after all, the Warren Court that started the whole federal support for the civil rights movement, and that was a Republican court done by Dwight D. Eisenhower, to be sure, but still, he did it. The problem is that I've been here while the Republican Party has slowly moved over here and then over here and then over here and over here. And I now have to go into the next room and down the hall in order to show where it's gone. But I don't tell students that, all right? I don't tell them anything usually about my, I don't say what party I am. So that's one point. But the other thing is getting people to correct things that are obviously wrong and racist gets them thinking, you know, and is not necessarily political. And doing what I was suggesting, critiquing the textbooks, is clearly academic. It's clearly something that's can I give an example of a teacher who had this happen by accident? It was really cool. I'll talk really fast. She was teaching 6th grade. It's in Central Illinois, and she she was teaching American history, and she got to the early presidents. You know, she said, well, you know, a lot of the presidents after the Adamses, most of the presidents owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Of course, George Washington did. Madison, Monroe, and it turns out that every single one of them did, except for the two from New Hampshire, the two from one from New Hampshire and one from Pennsylvania, and they were members of the far out pro-slavery wing of the Democratic Party too. Those two were, but her students interrupted and said, "What? No, they didn't, Mrs. Walker. If they owned slaves, if Jackson owned slaves, if they would be in the book, and there's nothing about it in here." But there was nothing about it in here. Now, I would have been a really bad teacher at this point. I would have said, "They did too. Now take notes." But she didn't do that. She said, "Oh, well, maybe I'm wrong. But tell you what, we got 18 people here and 9 presidents or whatever they had, maybe three to a president. Why don't you guys each pick a president and come back tomorrow and tell me if they own slaves?" And of course they all did, and they came back and they all did own slaves, except for the 2 Adamses and the 2 I mentioned, Buchanan and Pierce. Now they're pissed off at the textbooks for not telling them this. I mean, it turns out they even owned them in important ways, Jackson and Jefferson in particular. So now they're critiquing the textbook.
So one of the things that stands out to me as we think through this topic, the first thing I thought about was when I hear people say, well, anti-racist teaching it's too political. It shouldn't be in the classroom. First thing I thought about was, it was a quote by Dr. King, when Dr. King said, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." So to all of my educators out there who are grappling and struggling with the thought process, should I bring anti-racist teaching into my classroom? I respond to you by saying, in your classroom, do you teach your students to think critically? Do you teach your students how to challenge the thought processes of others? Or do you teach your students that there's one way to do something? So anytime when someone says that teaching anti-racist has become a political issue, I challenge that thought process and give you the weapons to use as part of that conversation, or just the thought process to challenge others people thinking and talk about education is truly about opening minds. Education is truly about opening doors so our boys and girls can begin to think critically and challenge the status quo. And when we talk about an anti-racist curriculum and we talk about the anti-racist movement in education, it's about dismantling the status quo and calling white supremacy out as what it is, and letting folks know that there's a way to think through this work to ensure that we're letting our young people know that who they are matter, where they come from matters. So as we talk about why anti-racist teaching is critical to be in the classroom and to be in our schools, when you're having this conversation with your coworkers, when you're having this conversation with parents, you can let your coworkers and parents know, I teach this way in an anti-racist mindset, because I want my boys and girls to know where they come from matter. I want my boys and girls to know the people that look like you, the people who don't look like you, they matter. And that gives them an opportunity to have pride in who they are. And as we talk about, when we talk about building our students up, letting our students know that where they come from and who they are, when we say that that matters to them, and they give our boys and girls an opportunity to celebrate their cultures in a way that most textbooks, we don't celebrate every culture in our textbooks. So making sure that your teaching celebrates those cultures, in turn, you not only with your words, but with your actions, you show your boys and girls that you're taking an anti-racist stance and you're letting them know that they matter. Ms. Freeman?
Can I just say this? I think one of the things is we've talked about the very practical strategies of what teachers can do and need to do. I think it's very important that we encourage our teachers to do the work, the self-reflective work. Because if you haven't worked this through within your own mind and heart, then it is going to be a challenge to offer that to your children. But one of the things about people who are on this particular site or as a part of this conversation, you're part of a community. To be able to be challenged, to be able to even have support, to feel comfortable enough to be honest about where we really are. And I think that's part of the things that I know Greg offers and Educational Cooperative offer. It's okay to be where you are, because that's just where you are. But but by reason of being a part of this type of engagement, you're saying, I'm not satisfied here. And that's true for any of us, for any situation. So I just want to encourage people, the teachers, to know it's okay to not be there yet, but to work through this process of reading and listening and hearing this challenge and moving forward. And I'm going to just say this. I think this is a good time for me to say it. On yesterday, I was a part of an anti-racist conference, and it was about a 7-year-old. It was a 1-minute presentation. And in her presentation, from just things that she's learned, she read the book, Baby Anti-Racist, and she's just been fired up. But what she said is, after she defined what racism is and what we need to do, she then talked about what we need to do to solve the problem. And she lifted her head and raised her back and stamped her foot and said, don't worry about trying. It's not about trying. It's time to use your voice, use your mind, and take.
That's right. Give it a try. You may not be perfect, but I think you've just lost audio video, Elois. Well, anyway,
she'll rejoin us. Yeah. What I'm hearing and oh, there she is. Yeah. There we come back. Yeah. Sorry.
You got frozen for a minute.
Did I?
Can I say something?
Yeah, we got your message loud and clear, though, it just at the very end, so it was punctuated well. Yes, certainly.
Yeah,
Yes.
you finished and then froze. It was very, very impressive. One way that all teachers, math teachers, every teacher, needs to participate in this ongoing process is the process of teacher expectations. And I want to talk about that. I'm actually an expert on that, damn it. And I want to tell you about this unbelievably good study that nobody knows about because it appeared in an obscure sociology journal that was done in Florida by two, I think they were just getting their PhDs, graduate students in sociology. What they did, they went to the mall. This is when malls were doing better than they are now, and everybody was there. They went to the mall and they took photographs of a bunch of teenagers, Black teenagers and white teenagers. This is a part of Florida that didn't have a whole lot of Latinos or Puerto Ricans or anybody from anybody else, all right? And they tried to take pictures of varied kids, all of them early teens, of varied social classes. Now, this mystifies me in a way because it seems to me even our lower classes dress pretty well in America, but anyway, they did this. Then they took a batch of teachers, a small batch of teachers, and they ran these photos past them, and they asked the teachers to put them into upper, middle, or lower class. And the teachers did so based on the photos, only there were lots with arguments and so on. And so the ones that they couldn't put, and they just grabbed the photos that seemed to have consensus. So you ended up with, I don't know, I think 3 photos, but I don't remember how many, of upper class, middle class, and lower class whites, and upper class, middle class, and lower class blacks. So we got these photos, okay? Now they took a whole bunch of teachers. The first group was just a small pilot group that they needed to do that ranking in order to, so it wasn't their ranking of upper, middle, and lower. Right? So they took a whole bunch of teachers and they asked them, they said we're gonna give you 10 statements and you can agree, disagree, you know, how you do it. You could agree strongly, medium, or slightly. Or you disagree, medium, slightly, medium, strongly. This is called the Leicard Scale, and we use it in sociology and so on. So they showed a picture of a student, and they said something positive, like, was likely to have read a book last summer. Okay? And then you can agree, disagree on that scale. Then they show another picture and ask the same question. Well, they actually asked 10 different questions about each student first. Another question is negative, like, is likely to be a behavioral problem, okay? Now, the first problem was not one teacher of the maybe 100 teachers they used said, wait a minute, you want me to judge these statements on the basis of a photograph? That's crazy. They all should have said that, right? Not one teacher said that. They were kind of, you people know students, you know, you're experienced teachers, and they didn't say that. Okay? That's the first problem. The second problem, the results were heartbreaking. You can already guess what the results were. The results came just like the experimenters feared. The white folks were arranged upper, middle, and lower like this, and the black folks were arranged upper, middle, and lower like this, okay? So there was a class difference and there was a race difference, both of them, right? And the people down here, the lower class black, yeah, likely to be a behavioral problem. Yeah, likely didn't. He didn't read a book last summer, all right? Now, it could be that only happens in Florida. Do you believe that? I mean, and I've seen myself do that in other contexts, you know, and I bet all of us here have done that. We're relieved when we get so-and-so as the clerk in the electronics store because he, and I'm saying he on purpose here, he looks smarter. We're relieved. I mean, anyway, that's what I'm just suggesting. We all can be like that. Certainly teachers can. And something helps them, and that is standardized tests. And so I want to say, especially for poor people and poor students, I don't mean poor students, students from economically poor families, especially for Black people compared to white people, Native Americans too, but you don't have a whole lot of those in Nashville. I want you to expect the hell out of them, right? Even if they come up with a terrible score on the Metropolitans or the Steinines or the SATs or the PSATs or whatever the heck test you give them from K all the way up to 12, including your standardized tests in Tennessee. And if you can't expect them in all fields, they are good at something. Maybe they're good at art, so they can do art that relates to what you're talking about in math or in social studies or whatever. And then you build on that. But expect the hell out of them and get them to start expecting more from themselves.
So I'm actually build on that thought process, Jim, because I actually focus in on that a lot when I'm coaching other leaders and I'm talking through the thought process, work with teachers. One of the things that I tell everyone when you're talking about an anti-racist lens, and especially if we're dealing with Black or brown students or any students that that come from economically disadvantaged families, you don't do them any service by feeling sorry for them.
That's right.
You want to take that anti-racist stance. You want to do right about others. Don't feel sorry for them. Make sure that they receive a world-class education. Push them to their limits. There's a quote that says, "Don't tell me that the sky's the limit because I've seen footprints on the moon." So we push and we push and we push to that thought process of one of the things that we often tell everyone is Students will do whatever you ask them to do, but they'll only do what you ask them to do. So if you're going to say that I'm going to have an anti-racist lens and I want to expect this from all of my students, but then when your Black and brown students get halfway, you celebrate, oh, you're making all these gains, great job. Well, then they think they've made it to the pinnacle at that point. If you're truly going to take that stance, and this is the conversation I'm having with my white colleagues, my white allies that are partnering with us in this work, push those Black and brown students to the level of perfection, because if we hold them to that standard, students look to rise up to those levels. So we want to definitely do that. And as we dig into this work, because I know a lot of teachers will watch this and say, hey, give me some practical steps, because that's my world. I hear practitioners all the time. What can I do to better my teaching as I take this anti-racist stance? So I'm gonna hit on 3 points that I definitely want to push out there. And my esteemed colleagues, feel free to jump in when I'm done with it, and just see if you can build on these thoughts or even challenge these thoughts. But when teachers are taking that anti-racist stance in the classroom, 3 strategies that they can do. 1, build student confidence. I hit on it earlier when we talk about making sure that students are confident in who they are, because oftentimes when we have boys and girls, especially if we have some of our students who are learning English as a second language, and they're coming from what Westerners sometimes call third world countries. So boys and girls who are living in refugee camps and things of that nature, they already come in feeling less than. So by taking that anti-racist stance, we began to teach confidence from the very beginning and let those boys and girls know you have value, you have worth. But you can build that confidence by focusing in on step 2. Celebrate your students' cultural heritage. And when I say celebrate their cultural heritage, this is when we do, as educators, we love our research projects and things of this nature. Have them research who they are, where they're from. Because what we oftentimes find is a lot of our students that we educate don't know anything about their background except from what we start telling them when we start teaching history and we start teaching civics and geography and things of that nature. They just have their local lens. So challenge them to dig into their roots, to find some of their cultural heritage, things that they can be proud of, and let them display that in front of others to show their pride. But once you do those 2 things,
Can I jump in there? But one of the things I want to emphasize, and it fits in right here, and I just had to jump in. I'm sorry.
Absolutely, no, go for it.
Okay, is that we want students to not just learn history, we want them to do history. And I emphasize exactly what you're saying, do your own history. As soon as you start having students do their own history, first of all, these middle class white folks, I mean, they just do. My history is pretty boring until you go back to about 1895, and I didn't know that so well, because and that's when I was an immigrant, in 1895. So the exact students who are maybe disadvantaged by being English as a second language, by being immigrants, are suddenly advantaged because they got people to interview. They can interview their own parents and learn all kinds of interesting stuff, whereas I can't interview my parent and learn anything because she's boring. Sorry about that. So that's really cool. And then you can have people do local history, especially the curriculum is even built for this in some ways, because we often have our high stakes tests, never mind, in like as early as March and certainly as early as April, in terms of the advanced placement tests in American history and things like that, the tests for the SAT and the ACT for college and blah, blah, blah. And you end up with a lame duck semester. What's going on that's of interest in May and June, especially your senior year, but even earlier? Well, have them do your own a project like this and end up, you can even, I've got more to say about this, but you can end up with a publishable book even, not exactly a book, but something that you do put in in your library that is the best thing they've ever done in their whole school career. And it's just from exactly you say, know yourself, research yourself, and suddenly your disadvantages become advantages. Sorry, back to you.
No, you're good. No, that's a perfect point to jump in.
I'm waiting for step 3.
Oh, look, and step 3 is the one that when we bring it home, because this is the one that we see with our young people that we need to practice more. And if we take this stance as anti-racist educators, they begin to take this stance as well. And it's simply words of affirmation and learning to appreciate things from others. So as we take that stance, so you build confidence, you teach that cultural heritage, and then we challenge your scholars as part of your teaching to use words of affirmation to appreciate others. I may be sitting in and I'm looking, I'm different from Elois, and I'm having this conversation, and I say, Tell me about the beautiful scarf that you have on your head. Why are you wearing that? What does that represent? So now not only did I let her know it's beautiful, but now she has an opportunity to talk me through it. And all of us have students in our classrooms that wear hijabs, that have different things that they wear to represent their culture. But we get so used to just seeing it. If we call it out, and that's the beauty of this anti-racist teaching. The same way we want to call out and talk about white supremacy and why we must dismantle it, we must teach our boys and girls how to call out and appreciate cultural differences, because when we do that, that sets the stage for not only anti-racist teaching, but our boys and girls to begin practicing anti-racist movements and ways of life. Because at that point, and I'm gonna pause so you can jump in, Elois, because ultimately this talks deeper than just Black, white, Hispanic, because there's also the thought process of making sure that this anti-racist movement ensures that we're teaching boys and girls how to not be homophobic, how to not be misogynistic. So there's other thoughts process of how we make sure that we appreciate others. But you look, I see it all in your face, like you're ready to go. You got the words right there to push out.
It's funny, I'm really listening and taking it in, but and the thing that maybe I moved up in my seat a little bit was, as we were talking and about the things to do, I was reflecting on the reality that we're in a different world right now. We don't have our children in our classrooms. We are doing virtual learning. A number of from what I'm hearing from some of my educator friends who are teachers as well as administrators, there's some children you're not even able to account for right now. They don't have their attendance over the computer like you're needing them to. And yet we have this relationship and we have this responsibility. And also in this same framing of what we're talking. So that even brings us back to a whole new way of figuring how to apply what you just said and what Jim just said. How do we apply that when we're virtual? And the other thing that is very real, and maybe I'm asking questions more than answering them right now, and you experts can help me. The other side that's very real is, how is this looking from a student point of view? So I've been out of the classroom about 20 years. And as I say, the last 20 years, I've been working with advocacy and work with children in summer programs and tutoring. So I still stay very connected to children and families and educators. But one of the things that I find that happens even recently as I talk to children, they're not feeling the love. And so I thought about that when we were talking about push them and, we got to get this and we got to get this. No, we need to back off of that, especially since we're not with them. And so the other side I would say to that, can we see how our children are speaking, maybe through their protest voice? That a lot of times what we call behavior, bad behavior is, quote, is really protest. That somehow you're not connecting with me. You don't see me. You're not giving me affirmation. Even if your words are, I mean, maybe you learn you're supposed to do it, but children can see your core. Children understand something deeper than what we learned and we can just project. And so I think it's a challenge for us to figure out how to hear what they're telling us so that we can adjust the things that we're knowing to do to what they need in this era of pandemic education.
I wish I had some words of wisdom about that last point, but I'm not teaching, and I don't, and I'm very impressed that you needed to bring that in. I do have one comment about what Ricki said that I think is helpful and relates to all teachers again, and that is there's study after study that show that you don't want to help girls do math more than you help boys do math, because if you do, girls get really good at asking for help, while boys get better at math. All right. So you don't even, and I think this relates even to helping folks in virtual learning. You don't always want to say, well, Susie, why don't you try X? And maybe it'll all make sense to you. You want to, and then when you get to Ronnie, you say, Ronnie, I think you can get this. You want to say to Susie, Susie, I think you can get this. I could give you in, but I don't think I should. I think you can get this. I really think you can. Give it another try. And then and maybe if you, once in a while, you can help people. I'm not saying you can't. But that the study after study shows that that's the biggest difference between boys and girls. And I bet it also happens that you were talking, Ricki, about students who do fairly well, half of it, and then get praised. No, they need to be praised for what they've done well, of course, but then say, you can get the rest, you can do it. You can do it at home, maybe. And that speaks to what you said, Elois, but it doesn't speak to it very well. I'm totally impressed with all these teachers all across America who actually go visiting some of the students who haven't been on the computer and get them back on and so on. It's going above and beyond the call of duty. It's what we have to do, but I'm so impressed.
Absolutely. So I've been pondering this thought as well as someone who, I grew up in poverty. So most of my schools I went to were mostly Black and brown. As an educator, most of the schools I've served have been predominantly economically disadvantaged or Black and brown students. But as I have these conversations with, again, some of our allies, and when I say allies, I'm specifically talking about white people who have joined in as allies in this work and said, we're going to dismantle white supremacy. We're going to call it for what it is. And we're going to ensure that we're using our privilege to ensure that we're helping others. One of the conversations that has come up was, some of my colleagues, some of our allies teach and work in schools that are predominantly white, but they want to still take this anti-racist stance. So some of that thought process was, hey, well, what strategies do you have? What ideas do you have where I can begin to, have this conversation? And I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it, both of your thoughts as well. Because when I have this conversation, the first thing I think is, well, I send everybody back to one of the foundational studies that I feel like talked about how racism works and it can affect everyone when Jane Elliott did the brown eye, blue eye study. So I tell people all the time, if you're in a school that's, predominantly white, I'm not saying show that study to students, but I'm saying you watch it if you're not familiar with it, so you can see the lens and get the understanding of how easily people begin to look down upon others. Yep, there you go, a class divided, absolutely. And then you take that to springboard that conversation. So here, now, since you've already pulled the DVD, I know you have thoughts. Here, love to hear both of your thoughts and just some strategies we can give to educators.
Well, first of all, I've taught from this I've taught a lot of teachers from this, and
Yes.
I would suggest that teachers need to see particularly the first 30 minutes. Okay, it then swings into something for people who run prisons and stuff, and it gets kind of off track of what we're doing. But the first 30 minutes are very rich, and they're rich in many ways. I want to refer to something I said earlier. They're rich in this expectation business, because of course she expects people with a certain kind of eye to be stupid the first day, and damn if they aren't stupid. And she even gets data on this by doing this flip chart thing, flip card thing, then timing it and so on. And then what's more astonishing, she tells them she lied to them, and actually they're the ones that are smarter and the other group is stupider, and she gets the other group to be stupider. I mean, in terms of the data, actually. I'm using the word stupider absolutely on purpose, okay? So I think you're right. Every teacher should see this. And I frankly don't see, I think fifth graders, I have to admit, I have never taught anybody younger than fifth grade. I have taught fifth grade on 2 different occasions, so I'm now an expert on that. So I've never taught anybody younger than fifth grade, but fifth graders, I think, can handle anything. Any picture, for example, including a lynching picture, it has to be taught with sensitivity, has to be taught reasonably, but they do not need, it's the parents sometimes who need to be mollycoddled, but the kids can handle it, right? And so that, I agree with you. I think fifth graders can watch the first, but I got another idea, and that is, in fact, this happened the first time I taught fifth grade. Let me tell a quick story. It was a very diverse middle school, Stanford Middle School in Stamford, Connecticut, has some of the richest people in America, investment bankers' kids, and it has some Haitian immigrants and some other people who are struggling in the not so good housing down by the railroad tracks. And it's a very interesting school. And I was there teaching the fifth grade, I believe it was, social studies class at 7:30 in the morning, and then the next one at 8:20, and the next one at 9:10, and I did it all day long. And by the time I was done, I had taught the whole fifth grade, right? All right. And so before I started, the assistant principal who had brought me said to me, "Now, Jim, what are you going to do with these kids?" And I showed them these pictures I was going to use. One of them was a picture of a lynching. One of them was a picture of a terrible ad for cream of wheat that showed a little 5-year-old whipping his black babysitter, and the wagon that the black babysitter was, I mean, the black babysitter wasn't being hurt, obviously, by a 5-year-old, but still. And he says to him, "Get up, uncle." And of course, the term uncle he was not the boy's uncle. That was a term of quasi-respect that we used in 1916 when this ad came out. We wouldn't want to say sir or mister to a black person. That was, and so we teach about all of that. Anyway, so I showed the assistant principal these pictures I was going to be teaching from, and she immediately said, "Oh, Jim, do you have to do that?" And of course, after she said that, I did have to do it. So, but I used that in the following way, by accident. And since I did it by accident, I don't claim credit for it, but it's a wonderful teaching technique for an all-white class, for example. I said to the students, I said, "Some people tell me that fifth graders aren't mature enough to handle what I'm about to show you." I didn't say it was your assistant principal. What do you think they did? They were twice as mature as you and me. They handled it beautifully. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And if you have an all-white class, some people tell me that an all-white class is just not really able to get beyond that and discuss slavery reasonably, or whatever tricky subject is that you're about to discuss. What do you think they'll do? They'll step up to the plate. It's the first step. You're having a conversation about the conversation. It's a meta conversation.
Yeah, that's very good. I appreciate the practical strategies. The thing I was thinking is that it's very important that we all deal with this matter, whether it's an all-white school or community, because we're in a society, a global society that is impacted by this that has been impacted by this hierarchy for hundreds of years. And so even a lot of the teaching will talk about the issue of The problem is within structures, within systems, within policies that impact all of us. And so therefore, we're one of the things that happens when people talk about white privilege or white supremacy is that, first of all, I don't have to see myself in a category if you're white. I'm just normal, I'm human. And these other people are something else, the they, the thems. And so those are the things that we have to open up, so that we can begin to see that it's not, again, just some little narrow teaching that we need to help the poor little Black people feel better about themselves, or the poor little brown, or the poor little indigenous people. It's a cultural problem, a systemic problem that has to be named. And this is such an amazing time to deal with this, because we've seen in the public arena so many expressions, of this difference, of this brutality of people who have Black skins, of the different treatment of people who protest peacefully if you're Black, and people who protest violently if you're white. And we see concessions being made and excuses being made for violence. How do we explain this? And when we don't talk about it, we can just stay in the nice little comfortable feelings that, well, which really the implication of it is white folks are somehow better and they get these privileges and these rights that other people don't get. And it's just okay. Yeah. And so I would say that out of that understanding of the cultural global problem, we need to talk about this everywhere and to everybody, so that we personally can see what our challenge is to get in there and bring those anti-racist changes.
In fact, the first question to ask would be, why are we in an almost all white school? And
that's right.
That's an interesting question. And I even have a little project that I could talk about next if I get asked. Students can investigate sundown towns. You all know what sundown towns.
Oh, right. Yeah. Why don't you say it? Because everybody may not, who's going to be listening.
Sundown town is a town that's all white, or was all white for many years on purpose. And Tennessee is full of them in various places. And students can investigate sundown towns. I have a little paper at my website called How to Confirm a Sundown Town. And I got to tell you, 3 middle students in Eastern Ohio actually did a National History Day project on sundown towns, and they won the state, and they got to go to the national, and they won excellent in the national, and these were middle school students.
Wonderful.
I don't see why students in Tennessee can't do that too. And again, that's not exactly political, I mean, why is our town so white?
And let me just say this part about sundown towns too. In some of their situations, the reason they're all white is that they ran the Black people out.
Absolutely.
That's another important part of the history.
Yes, they'll find that out. Yes.
As we get ready to pin this conversation and set the stage for the live discussion that we're going to have on Saturday, to all of my educators that's watching this, and I would invite my colleagues to join me in giving them 1 or 2, parting thoughts or just things to just keep on the forefront of their head, and let it start to really get those wheels turning as we dig into the live conversation coming this weekend. I'll leave you all with 3. The 3 things as we talk about next steps that we say, 3 is just a number of completion for me. So I try to keep with the Holy Trinity. So to all of my educators out there, when we talk about next steps, things that, where we go from here, I hit on it multiple times in this conversation. It's something that I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind. It starts with the man in the mirror. If you want to make sure that you're preaching anti-racist strategies in education, it's going to start by you living them, by you making sure that you have these strategies in your classroom. Step 2, build your accountability team. Do not feel like you have to go about this work on your own. This work is heavy. If this work was easy, it would have been done. Like one of the things that I heard someone say, and if this work was something that Black people or brown people could have done on our own, we would have already done it. Yeah. We need allies. We need people in this work that don't look like us, that don't talk like us, that don't come from where we come from, that don't have the experiences we have, to join with us and push this and make sure that we're making this world a better place for all of our boys and girls that are coming behind us. And step 3, after you start with that reflection, after you build your accountability team, on that team, have some check-ins and check-ons. Check-ins and check-ons are totally different. Check-ins, I'm having this conversation. Jim, how are you doing in your classroom? Or are you, how's that lesson going? Talk to me about the thought process that you're doing. Elois, how are things going in your classroom? I know that you're getting ready to hit this unit. Talk to me, how you gonna make your students feel valued about their culture? Check-ons are something totally different. When we know how heavy this work is, sometimes we got to just call each other and say, hey, Jim, that was a tough topic you handled in class. How you feeling? What can I do? Are there any resources, or do you just need to kind of just process? Part of having that accountability team is having that circle where you can process your emotions raw. When you're talking about an anti-racist stance, sometimes you're going to say some things that make people uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. That's part of it, because a lot of people will tell you they're not a racist. They just don't take the anti-racist stance. So when we talk about silence, sometimes is agreement. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to say some things that make people uncomfortable. And when you do that, it's going to be critical that you check in and check on, and it's vice versa, have people that can check in and check on you, so that you don't feel like you're carrying this weight by yourself. Because if we're truly going to make this world a better place, if we're going to truly use education to enlighten a generation, it's a heavy burden that we must all take on together.
Amen. And so I would say amen to all that has actually been said throughout this whole session. First, I commend those who are participating. I think that says a whole lot about you. And I encourage you in this process. And you're in a good space in the Education Cooperative, but that you've got a place to do this very thing. And that even as you get stronger, you go help somebody else. Not only help somebody else as an educator, but I still challenge you to go to another place. And even like a lot of people are very concerned about their health and don't want to really go into other spaces to assist somebody. These families who are needing food and needing a place to stay. I say, find a way that you can reach out and help. Use your expertise and your knowledge to advocate for these injustices that people have. People who don't look like you don't have the same rights and resources that you have. And it's not because there's something wrong with them. It's something wrong with a system. So as you realize that, I encourage you additionally to find a way that you can go and do something different for somebody else who's not in your circle of influence and friendship. But I do commend you for being here.
Let me build on what you just said. I thought the questions, all of them were quite challenging and show that people have already been thinking. I was impressed with all the questions. But what I'm not impressed with is the people who are not members. And I would suggest that one thing you might each do, each one reach one. Maybe get somebody else to come by this weekend, by this Friday.
Okay.
And if not, then sign in for the next time you do something. Because my concern is not for you folks. My concern is for the person who doesn't have any interest in being in the education cooperative. So each one reach one.
Good. Very good. And this is wonderful for me to be a part of this. I knew it would be exciting and enriching, but I am very pleased to have shared this time with these two brothers.
We had fun, and I hope, therefore, people watching it will have fun. And if you don't have fun,
right.
That's it. I cannot thank each of you enough. That is a little over the hour. I mean, the thread among all of your ideas there, that this is not work to be done alone. This is work to be done in community with partners, whether you're getting your students to ask questions, exposing areas in which they can start picking at and discovering the truth on their own, couched in the discovery and learning process, and celebrating the cultures that they bring to the classroom every day. This work is made better when we do it together. So thank you so much for being a part of that today together. We look so forward to seeing you on Saturday. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.